Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to tonight's second half. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. The merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go, and yes, folks, they do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump into tonight's second half, shall we? So, earlier in the month, or actually last month, I had shared a encounter pretty close to Elkhorn, Wisconsin, the Beast of Bray Road. And I received an email today from that person. And I responded saying, hey, I really hope that you can come on the show. I'm waiting for a response. I'm also waiting for a response from the gentleman who was overseas as a soldier in Afghanistan. And he and I have corresponded a couple little times, a couple sentences here and there. But I'm hoping that he can come on. I got a couple people in line that I'm very excited about. So I kind of wanted to give the heads up on that. Now, let's move into today's first encounter. I grew up in a very rural area, deep in the woods of Maine. We had maybe 4 neighbors in a 10-mile radius, and not having TV or video games, I spent all of my free time exploring the forests, mountains, caves around my home. On my 12th birthday, myself and a group of friends got together to celebrate. There was a mountain in the forest near my house, and half of the group of kids wanted to go to the mountain and play manhunt, which was a version of tag in which 2 teams split off, one hiding while the other team searched for them. When found, they had to be tagged, and then they would be put in the dungeon of the captured team on the other side of the mountain. I'd like to preface this by saying weird stuff had happened on this mountain in the past. I could sometimes hear flutes and drums in the forest while on it, and even brought friends up without telling them, and they'd get creeped out saying, "Oh my God, do you hear that?" Other times I would get a weird feeling, nothing scary, just that maybe I shouldn't be there. So half the friends didn't feel like playing on the mountain. I'm really not sure why. So in mid-afternoon, the rest of us hiked into the forest and set up our respective camps on each side of the mountain. We established a perimeter for playing, and my team was given 5 minutes to hide. Knowing the mountain better than anyone, I chose the best hiding spot. It was down the mountainside where this triangle of rock jutted straight outward. Picture the rock in The Lion King where baby Simba is first presented to the world. It was hidden from above, one having to climb down to a certain way. Once crouched in it, no one could see you from above unless they climbed down. From below, there was maybe a 20-foot drop, and no one could see you there either unless they went a good distance away from the mountain and could see it as a whole. Several minutes go by, I heard my friends laughing and running, getting discovered and tagged. But at some point, all the sounds stopped. At first, I chalked it up to everyone being found and me being the last one left. But all the sounds had stopped. The birds had stopped chirping, the insects buzzing, and the wind in the trees had completely ceased. It It was so quiet that my own breath seemed loud. I remember thinking, this is weird. Then this monstrous growl erupts over my head. I'd never heard anything like it. It was like a lion, but different, more guttural, and it sounded like the animal was huge. I thought maybe a mountain lion. Either way, I was frozen with fear and dread. The sound came from right above me, but I had heard no footsteps on the rock. I got the feeling that it knew right where I was. I couldn't drop down or go up. I was trapped. The thing growled again, and always, being pretty brave, stupid kid, I jumped up from my hiding spot, screaming bloody murder and flailing my arms like a nut job ready to haul ass away from this creature, all the way to the other side of the mountain. But nothing was there. Given the very short time had passed since I heard the second growl, it would have been impossible for whatever to just disappear completely out of sight. This side of the mountain was a bald rock. As soon as I went back up, all the sounds returned, and I now heard my friend screaming my name. I ran through the trees to the other side of the mountain where all my friends were gathered together in some distress. My friend said, "Where the heck were you?" Apparently, I was very angry and worried. "Hiding," I told them, confused. He proceeded to tell me that they had been yelling my name for 10 minutes because weird stuff was happening and they wanted to go home. He thought something bad had happened to me. The mountain's not that big. It would have been impossible for me not to hear them, especially since they were combing the entire mountain calling my name. I knew something was off. "What weird stuff?" I asked. They pointed to the trees surrounding the perimeter of the mountain. Some of my friends were very agitated and stressed out, sitting on their haunches and looking scared. I saw why. In the trees, 5 to 6 mist-like shapes, about 3 feet tall, 2 feet off the ground, whitish smoke, in the shape of a lemon. They would disappear and then reappear closer to the mountain. I watched, mesmerized, as these weird little clouds got closer and closer, until they were right at the base of the mountain. Then my friend, a girl, screamed something like, "They're coming for us!" My friend, who had told me everything, said, "Come on, guys, we need to haul ass out of here." We ran the hell off of that mountain. When we got off the mountain, I noticed how dark it suddenly was, when it was just light out before. At home, my mom and friends who had stayed behind were freaked out, saying they were about to come looking for us. "Where were you?" they asked. We told them, on the mountain. We hadn't even finished our game of manhunt, but apparently we had been gone for over 4 hours. I've always wondered what happened that day. Where did that growl come from? Why didn't I see it? How come I didn't hear my friend screaming my name for 10 minutes? And what the hell were those weird shapes, and why were we missing time? Not sure if we'll ever know. Maybe something similar has happened to you guys. Also, I didn't mention this before, but when everything went silent, I felt like I was being watched very intently, like something was studying my every movement and scoping me out. You know, that feeling when your arm hair stands up and you get goosebumps. That's what I felt before and after the 2 growls. But when the sounds came back, the feeling was gone. Today's second encounter. For some background, I lived in a small town in the interior of Alaska that had a missile defense base nearby. I've noticed a lot of strange happenings in my time there. I believe the government could be involved in some disappearances. The Men in Black. So the land used to hunt and fish in this area was owned by the government, so you had to actually get a pass to hunt and fish on it. Anyway, you never saw any military personnel out there, mainly because the base was just missile defense. So there was no reason for them to go out into the woods and such. This base also had no federal agents at all that anyone knew of, which made this next encounter very interesting. Me, my brother, and our dad were fishing on this lake that was right on the road one night at 10 p.m. The sun was still bright, since this is Alaska in the summer. Suddenly, a weird all-black SUV came out of nowhere, and two identical guys, all in black, drove past real slow and just stared at us while just inching along the dirt road. They never took their eyes off of us and came back around multiple times, never knowing what they were doing in the woods that night. The bear. This is a creature story I have. Back in the military land, at about 6 at night, my dad and me and my brother-in-law were going to the lake we regularly fish. While driving through a mock-up Middle East town they had out there, I saw something on the side of the road. It looked like a huge, giant German Shepherd. It was definitely a dog. There was no doubt about it, but it was huge and almost crawling like a human. I saw it for maybe 15 seconds, and once my dad and brother-in-law saw it, it was already pretty much gone. They instantly chalked it up as a bear. All they saw was the rear end of it, so they had no reason to think differently. But I know what I saw was no bear. A cage. Another time, out on that government land, we came across something we probably shouldn't have. One night, we just decided to see where some random dirt roads went. One road led us deep into the woods, away from the tundra, and into a very dark valley area. There was a huge lab there in the middle of nowhere. Nothing on it was labeled, and all the cars in the parking lot were government plated, no personnel cars. The parking lot was packed, yet there was no sign of life at this place. No lights, no people. A full place with no people anywhere to be seen. The worst part of this, however, was the cage. Not far from the lab was a giant animal. Cage, and it was huge. Multiple cars could fit into this cage, and it was obviously meant for some animal, but what animal that big was in those woods, and why did they have a cage for it? No predators. This town, like I said, was in rural Alaska, so obviously bears and wolves should have been common occurrence, but there were no predators. You'd see moose all the time, but never bear or wolves, and nobody ever mentioned seeing them, ever. But these huge moose always would wind up dead with multiple broken and twisted bones and skulls messed up badly. But still no predators to be seen, and a lot of the bodies weren't even eaten. The upside-down trees. Once you head past the military base for a while, you head more into a wooded highway. One part of this highway was burnt to a crisp from fires that happened pretty much every summer. However, in the middle of all this dead forest, there were fresh upside-down trees that were put so deep into the ground that strong winds in the area wouldn't move them one bit. This never made any sense to me. Now finally, the sickness. This story is not mine, but my brother-in-law's. He lived in this town most of his childhood and adult life. He's about 15 years or older than me, and this takes place in the early 2000s, I believe. One fall/winter, a sickness fell over the town. Everything shut down, schools were empty, and kids would stay home. The sickness was unlike anything he had ever seen or heard of. I don't remember the exact symptoms, but it reminds me of people that got sick near Wi-Fi signals and such. He said everyone had it, and it was crippling, but for some reason, none of the military personnel would be getting it when they came to town for groceries and such. Then one day, like literally in one day, it was gone. Everyone felt better and nothing was wrong anymore. It was as if it vanished into thin air. He believes the military or the lab in the woods had something to do with it, and he stands by it to this day. I've lived in the Alaskan Triangle and saw my fair share of things and heard about many missing people, and found many abandoned houses where the residents just disappeared into thin air. Something is going on in rural Alaska, and it's terrifying and dangerous, and should not be taken lightly. I plan to go back and find more information, and I want to find out what's happening out there. Just so you guys know that I'm not lying, The town's name is Delta Junction, Alaska, and the base is Fort Greely. Today's third part of the upload. I have two things that I really need to get off of my chest. I'm an experienced outdoorsman. I live in the mountains of northwest Colorado. I've worked as a fishing guide and spent many nights camping in the backcountry. The area I live is surrounded by national forest. Having lived in several cities, I've always been more comfortable in the woods than anywhere else. Spent weeks fishing, hiking, camping in the remote areas of Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. Encountered many black bear, a few grizzly. Mountain lions are elusive, so I've only seen one. Occasionally see fresh tracks, and have had that feeling of being watched. Only been scared a few times in the woods. Only twice have I been terrified. Have no good explanation for either one. Decided to go on an afternoon hike. I like this particular trail where I park about 6 miles from home. Parked and saw one other truck. Drank some water, ate a sandwich before locking everything in my truck, including my gun and phone. Intentionally traveled light so I could move fast. Only planned about 30 minutes in, 30 minutes back. Wearing running shoes, shorts, t-shirt, and a bright yellow baseball cap. Notably, that hat is so obnoxiously bright that friends say it probably scares the fish. I begin running around 2 p.m. as the first few miles are relatively flat. Trail follows a creek that flows off a mountain through a canyon. There are several trails that branch off heading up into the mountains. Prefer a particular trail that follows the edge of the canyon with the creek flowing below. It's absolutely gorgeous. Before the trail gets steep, it takes you through a large aspen grove. There is a point about 30 minutes in where I plan to turn around. Trail becomes increasingly less worn and more difficult beyond that point. Hiked the area many times. Something felt off this time. Didn't feel normal. Moved through the aspen grove before taking a steep trail up the mountain when I got a strange feeling. Stopped and noticed it was quiet. Something made me look up the mountain to the right, to a point several hundred yards above. Noticed a large granite rock formation. The area is off the trail, so I'd never looked there before, though I saw movement. Probably a black bear, as they're common. Curious, I pressed on. Definitely not scared at this point, but noticed the silence. Continued hiking and reached the point where I planned to turn around. Decided to hike further, hoping to see what caught my eye earlier. Trail becomes overgrown and harder to follow at this point. Had been further than this before, but never off the trail. Noticed an aspen tree bent over the trail had been uprooted and broke off. The tree was green, so that was odd. Could have been a lightning strike, but wasn't clear. Walked maybe another eighth of a mile, then took the right off the trail heading in the direction of the granite rocks. Wasn't concerned about getting lost, since it's easy to orient myself with the canyon and creek. Hiked off the trail, up towards the large meadow with many granite boulders. Reflecting on it, something was compelling me to go to that meadow. Climbing, scrambling uphill to get where I could sit, I got to the meadow and noticed the rocks. Looked like granite fortress. Sat down on a log, enjoying the scenery, looking down into the canyon at the creek below. Meadow and rocks were behind me. Looked around and didn't see any animals. Suddenly I noticed it was dead quiet. It had been a sunny, warm day with birds and bugs everywhere. Wasn't scared yet, but noticed the extreme silence. Could hear the creek before, so it wasn't as startling as now. Began taking off my running shoes. Notably, as this isn't something I normally do, since I have permanent nerve damage to my right ankle. I walk/run with a limp and sometimes wear a brace. Remember it feeling like my feet were burning. Wasn't practically hot, not over 70 degrees. This was becoming unnerved by the dead silence and started tying my shoes. This is where things turn weird. Clearly heard my dad call my name, my first name. The voice was loud and came from behind me. I talked to my father earlier in the day. He was at his home in Georgia. No way he was calling from the rocks behind me. Immediately became overcome with fear. Difficult to describe how overwhelming. Began sweating and shaking. It was like knowing a lion is stalking without seeing it, but more terrifying. Definitely not screwing around at this point. Stood up and turned to look behind me and saw nothing but the large granite rocks. Started hauling ass down the hill toward the canyon and trail below, absolutely terrified and feeling something was chasing me. Literally stumbled, fell, and rolled down the mountain, stood up, and couldn't recognize anything. Everything looked completely different. No canyon, creek, or trail. It was cloudy, and I wasn't in the same place anymore. At this point, I started hauling ass in what I thought was the right direction. Eventually, I found the trail and recognized my location. Sprinted through the aspen grove back to my truck. Didn't look at my watch, not sure how long I was gone for. I was so terrified I couldn't drive hardly home. I'm not sure what happened, but I've never been so afraid in my life. I know something was stalking and chasing me. Yeah, I've gone back to that area, but I'm too afraid to go to that same meadow with the granite boulders. Considered going back well armed, but instincts tell me it's a bad place. I'll never hike again without my .357 Magnum and haven't since. Something scared the hell out of me, and I feel I was close to becoming a victim. I trust that my flight instinct kicked in for a good reason. The second incident happened about a year after, late September in Route, Medicine Bow National Forest, Colorado. I like campgrounds in the off-season when it's not crowded. My girlfriend and I went to our favorite federal campground, located about 10 air miles from the previous incident. But you'd need to cross a mountain in the park range, so distance seems greater. The campground is only open a few months a year as it's located 10,000 feet. Average snowfall is 350 inches, so it's usually snowed in. It's crowded during the summer, but rarely anybody around midweek during the off-season. There is usually a campground host parked in an RV around to help people with firewood and stuff. He's an old man that I know. He wasn't there. Typical federal campground where you put $12 in an envelope and drop it in a strongbox. There are 2 loops surrounded by campsites, with a particular site that's my favorite, as it's further off the perimeter and private. Odd when we arrived, because we were literally the only people there, no host or other campers anywhere, so we were stoked about having the place to ourselves. Did the usual truck camping setup with the tent, firewood, cooler, books, and other items we wouldn't carry backpacking. Walked around the campground, didn't see anybody the entire time, which was a little strange, but not that concerning. Built a fire and sat around enjoying the evening. Gorgeous fall weather with the leaves falling, crunching when you walk on them. Those of you who camp know the sound of fire and leaves rustling in the wind. It's my favorite season in the woods. And this was an above-average night. Eventually, we retired to our tent. I don't know what time it was. It was our big truck camping tent, not a small backpacking tent, so we could move around some. Lying in the tent, reading, she falls asleep before me. Today, there is no way a vehicle could pull into this place and not be heard, because it was so peaceful. Listening to the leaves blow and thinking about what a privilege it really is to be here. Wide awake and not tired enough to sleep, got up a few times to check the fire embers. Sometime, probably after midnight, I'm lying in my sleeping bag, and I hear something. Walking around. Now there are deer, elk, moose, mountain lions, and bears moving around in the fall, so I wasn't immediately alarmed. No grizzlies in Colorado since the 70s. At least, that's what most people think. Some scientists disagree and say there may be a few remaining in the San Juan Mountains. Black bears don't scare me unless they're acting aggressive. Familiar with a bull moose in the area that I've seen for years. Stopped reading and listened carefully. I could hear the leaves blowing, but also something walking on the leaves. It was getting closer to the tent when I realized that it was bipedal. Immediate fear was different from what I described in the previous incident where I was shaking, sweating, and fleeing. Remember my heart racing and running for my life. This time I froze. I couldn't breathe. Heart beating out of my chest like I'm hiding. Trying not to move or make a sound as I hear it walking around the tent. Unmistakably walking on two legs because of the dry fallen leaves make every step sound loud. Never considered waking my girlfriend. Terrified in the calm rather than panicking way. Lying, trying to not make a move, unable to take a deep breath. Considered what the hell is walking around my tent. We all know how different sized people sound walking on leaves. A 200-pound man sounds different than a little girl. Whatever this creature was walking around the tent was absolutely huge. I could tell from the footsteps, and I was friggin' petrified. I didn't have a gun, but I did grab a good-sized knife and held onto it, knowing it was useless. Now this is where everything gets terrifying, as if it wasn't enough already. I'm lying there waiting for this motherfucker to leave, hoping I hear whatever it is walk away from the tent and campsite. Nope, it starts getting closer. I hear it walking toward the tent and I'm breathless with fear, literally waiting for something to grab us, paralyzed with fear as I remember I couldn't move. Getting out of the tent was never an option. The moon was relatively full, so when it approached I saw a huge shadow of a creature standing up through the fabric of the tent. I could hear it breathing on the tent. It was standing directly above, looking at me through the tent. It was, without a doubt, bipedal. Stood over us for a few moments. Then I heard it walk away from the campground, back into the utterly vast wilderness. I couldn't sleep. I listened all night until sunrise. I didn't tell my girlfriend right away, but started packing our shit to get the hell out of there immediately. Looked around and didn't see any footprints, but the leaves were thick on the ground, so it wouldn't be easy to see. Packing up, I noticed still nobody was in the campground. I know it wasn't a deer, elk, moose, mountain lion, or bear. Could have been a huge man, but where the hell did he come from and where did he go? I know it wasn't a man. It didn't want to harm us, I know, because I was vulnerably laying there, and it could have easily killed us. Thought about it and wondered if it's connected to the previous incident I described. Was I fleeing from something like this before but being stalked? What if it has powers that some of you have described like interdimensional, cloaking, and mimicking ability? Could this be what people are talking about? There are other documented cases in the area as we are in or near a cluster. One case in particular comes to mind that I'm not sure is covered in the Missing 411 books. Same general area where a few years ago an experienced hunter went missing in September from a group of several men outside of the state. Apparently experienced and familiar with the area. Man goes missing, search and rescue look everywhere for days. Man found later dead in a place already searched, no clear cause of death. I know one of the search and rescue people, and he said it was really screwy and weird since they had searched where they found him. Did this man piss off whatever was watching me? What the hell is happening? Finally, to give context on the setting, I'm not sure if some of you will say it was a man. This is a vast wilderness in one or more remote area of the lower 48. I encourage people to look at a map of Route Medicine Bow National Forest and the Zirkle Wilderness. This particular campground is isolated. There is an approximate 3/4 mile drive down a dirt road off a main road to the campground, so you hear vehicles approaching. There is nothing but vast, expansive wilderness in the direction from which it came and went. I'm increasingly thinking that this incident is related to the first. I saw some strange things in the woods, but Wasn't at any point in fear for my life, but twice. I'm 54 and spent most of my life exploring back country without anything too frightening happening until about 3 years ago. It's alright if you don't believe me or offer an opposing point of view. I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. Lastly, this wilderness isn't like Georgia or Ohio, where you will eventually run into civilization if you keep walking in any direction. You could walk for weeks and many miles without seeing anything but backcountry. Today's fourth and final encounter. A few years back, after a divorce, I ended up homeless and living in an RV for about a year. I was offered a job 3,000 miles away from my ex, and it seemed like a good idea at the time. So my 2 dogs and I started driving west. In western New Mexico, outside of Albuquerque, we stopped at a native casino and RV park for the night. It was a very nice park. The bathhouse was huge and meticulously cleaned. The sort of place where tourists weren't allowed to feel uncomfortable while camping next to miles of wilderness in the middle of a reservation. I was just glad they didn't turn us out for being in a 40-year-old small RV other parks have had. Turns out RV living is only okay if it's obviously a choice instead of a need. The next morning I checked outside my door before letting my 2 dogs out. There are a lot of things that would be happy to snack on a toy poodle. Sure enough, a coyote was exploring the area. I'm used to East Coast coyotes that will take off as soon as they see you're a full-size man. So I hopped out, left my pups locked up, and made sure I didn't make eye contact as I went towards the bathhouse. I nodded and greeted him politely as I went by. He was still there when I came out. I told him I'd appreciate it if he gave us some space so my kids could come out for their bathroom breaks before we got onto the road. He huffed at me and started walking down the dirt road out into the bush. After a few steps, he turned and looked back at me, so I followed behind him for 30 feet or so. Just for the record, following a coyote into the desert at dawn probably wasn't the wisest decision to make. I was very careful not to leave the dirt road. There was a natural clump of 3 boulders about 10 to 12 feet tall within easy eye shot of the casino. The coyote calmly walked around those rocks, and then from the other side, moving at the same casual pace, came an older native gentleman. His hair was in braids to his waist. He was wearing old jeans, blue gingham shirt, and a woven hat. He tipped his hat at me and kept walking east, out into the bush. That was when a raven I hadn't seen started laughing at me from atop of the tallest boulder. The bird took off flying east, and in the light of the sunrise seemed to shift from black to white to orangey red in color. I wished them both a kind day, hoofed it back to the park, and broke camp in record time. Ravens and crows followed me for the entire time I lived on the West Coast, even when I'd walk to work. There were 3 that paced me every day. Now that I'm back on the East Coast, I kind of miss them. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed today's upload as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I really am seeing a connection. I'm seeing a very, very real connection. And I think the missing people, I think the cryptids, and I think everything else are just pawns in this game with whatever is playing with us. It's something bigger than we think. I know the government knows possibly what it is. I don't think they're it, though. I think they are intrigued and probably terrified like we are, and that's why they're keeping it out of our sight and minds, or trying to at least. But I think there is something bigger than we could even grasp. You know, we may think we can grasp something like this, but I don't think there is a way. Because whatever it is absolutely terrifying. when you have things like missing people, cryptids, UFO aliens, satanic cults, other stuff like that on your playboard, and all we have is us. Shit's gonna get real weird soon. And I hate saying it because at the beginning of the year I said we're gonna get hit with a whole bunch of people getting attacked and a whole bunch of lies, and it happened. I really hope that whatever happens long after I'm gone, my kids are gone, my kids' kids are gone, and their kids' kids are gone. Because I don't want anyone to be around for whatever's going to happen, because it's not going to be friggin' pleasant. Alright guys, I hope you all enjoyed tonight's second half as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is, after all, your support that keeps this channel growing and going. And honestly, what gives people a place to share their experiences, ideas, and theories, judgment and ridicule free, just treated with the respect that we all deserve. Thank you. Stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real, they're out there, and they are dangerous. Share this information with the people you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for answers, and God bless.